Hello everyone. There have been a couple of updates since my last absolute difficulty viable block dodge assault playstyle guide, and with the sweeping changes to both the meta and the core mechanics since then, I felt it was about time to revisit the playstyle and bring everything up to date. It's a build that I genuinely enjoy, and judging by the metrics on that guide, many of you either enjoy it as well or are eager to learn how to make assault really work. The assault class remains the mobile, massive burst damage dealing, Extremis Terminus slaying melee class with a high skill ceiling and a steep learning curve. Hello, this is future me editing this in post. I'll just run some images off the current class weapon perks while I talk. I'm intervening just to provide context. The majority of the background footage you will see throughout this video with the White Scar assault on Decapitation is from patch 9 when block weapons were a lot slower. The reason for my intervention now is because in the background footage we were just about to transition to the class and weapon perks I was using in that operation. You'll notice that these perks I'm showing now and the perks after the transition, after this interruption, are almost exactly the same with the exception of the contested health perk on Assault. That had just come out at the time, I was giving it a try. But I just wanted to provide this clarity and also explain why this speed stat is slower in this background footage. All of the stitched together clips that I've put in, that is not the background footage, is from patch 10, so at least there's that. As I mentioned in the previous guide, you really need to understand the game's mechanics to make this class shine in the higher difficulties. You must understand your melee combos with your chosen weapon, along with how many hits each enemy type can take with those movesets. Alongside this, you will need to understand the enemy behavior and attack patterns, and knowing when to land your perfect dodges and block weapons, so knowing your dodge and block timings. Alongside this as well, you'll need to know how to manage your armor economy with lethal and non-lethal gun strikes, and how to make careful but also deliberate uses of your jetpack charges. Simply put, the assault class is not one that you can pick up and play like the Vanguard or Heavy. Instead, it's the class you graduate to, the one you play once you've built an understanding of how the game works. Now, while I have plenty to say about Assault's inaccessibility, and I will absolutely make a video on improvements I would like to see, the one thing that I cannot say is that Assault is a bad class, despite what a large portion of the community believes. Quite the contrary, because in the right hands, it's an incredibly mobile, evasive and offensive melee class that deletes hordes, bullies all enemy threat levels and chunks terminus enemies with ease. It just demands a very different approach compared to the static defensive playstyles of the other classes. In my previous guide I highlighted the strength of the block Thunderhammer, which continues to output amazing damage. But over the past few patches, one weapon has called to me more so than everything else, and completely elevated the block dodge assault playstyle for me, and that is the block power sword. The block power sword has a solid cross threat level damage profile that ends up being extremely versatile in practice. It's got faster attack chains which let you reach higher damage multipliers through consecutive actions rather than waiting about charging up your attacks, which, by the way, interrupts the flow of combat despite having strong output. So the Thunderhammer's aftershock, and of course everyone knows the damage potential of the Power Fist's charge attacks. The Power Sword also delivers extremely high ground pound burst damage against Extremis and Terminus. Against Minoris hordes, it has zero trouble slicing them apart with power whirl attacks, and against mixed hordes, block stacks on top of those power whirls let you stay on the offensive almost non-stop. Building on the structure of my previous block dodge assault guide, I've taken a different approach this time to really emphasize how the block power sword's utility meshes with assault's mobility, an offensive toolkit in the current state. I've also included dedicated sections and footage on how to block different types of enemy attacks as examples, plus the exact combos you will need against various enemy types to help paint a better picture of how powerful the block power sword assault is, alongside some proper demonstrations of dodging Zoanthrope and Neurothrope beams and many more tips to help you realise assault's true potential. Furthermore, the advice that I have in this commentary, tips, strategies guide for the block dodge power sword assault applies to absolute difficulty operations. It does not fully extend to hard stratagems, as they have modifiers which reduce the damage output that all classes do. So for example, the ground pounds of the block Thunderhammer and the block power sword and power fist, etc., with the usual setup, will not one-shot on hard stratagems. Lastly, just for clarity before moving on to a proper review and overview of the block power sword itself, the advice in this video is aimed at fighting Tyranids with the assault class. While I do just fine running assault against chaos, I am not in a position to give any meaningful advice, because I absolutely detest the Thousand Suns. I prefer fighting Tyranids anyway, and I'm sure the vast majority of the player base does too. The Relic Block Power Sword. I genuinely cannot overstate how powerful this weapon is. The move you'll rely on the most outside of ground pound attacks and any other assault shenanigans is the Power Whirl attack, which is incredibly strong and in my opinion outright better than Power Rake. To perform this attack, you first begin with a light attack, wait a brief moment for the sword to glow, then tap the attack button again. The initial light attack has about a 1x damage multiplier, which varies depending on whether you enter the attack with speed or power stance, while the Power Whirl, which consists of 2 attack animations back to back, hits for a 4x multiplier on each part. In total, to the same enemy or enemies that you hit, that's a 9x damage multiplier executed consecutively with those 3 attacks, and that is quite a lot of damage indeed. Now, while the 9x multiplier does sound phenomenal and it does deal great damage, you must note that the Power Sword's base light attack damage isn't as high as a weapon like the Thunderhammer. However, the speed of executing this combo is much faster than charging Aftershock on the Thunderhammer, which means you can stay aggressive, maintain stagger, and control crowds with far more consistency. The Power Rake move is performed by holding the attack button after a light attack, and each Power Rake has a 2.5 times base damage multiplier, which can be raised further with class and weapon perks. Personally, I only find it useful against ranged Majoris. After their 2 short melee swings, they tend to hop backwards, and the Power Rake will stagger them at that distance. If you would like to know the damage multipliers for the other attacks for the Power Sword and also the other melee weapons and ranged weapons as well, you can find these in the Space Marine 2 master spreadsheet, which I will put in the description below. In most cases, in general combat, Power Whirl is the attack that you will use the most. With block stacks, you can press the advantage and constantly stay on the upper hand, which is a nice segue into the next section. Block weapons are powerful and they have plenty of utility. There are many videos and written guides exploring the specifics of block weapons, so I'll just do a quick recap of it. Firstly, you cannot parry with block weapons. You can only perfect block, which requires precise timing versus fencing balanced. Perfect blocks, unlike parries, do not grant you gun strike opportunities. Instead, you gain an effect called Adrenaline Surge. You can stack 2 adrenaline surges in total, and after getting 2 perfect blocks to get those 2 adrenaline surge stacks, you receive the following upon your next attack. A small AoE explosion which staggers enemies in a small radius, 90% additional damage for 2.4 seconds. Every attack you make within that 2.4 seconds has extreme poise damage, which allows you to stagger, stunlock, and interrupt most enemies. Lastly, you will also receive 1 armor segment upon that first attack. Having the ability to stagger and stunlock enemies while dealing higher damage is what makes block weapons extremely powerful, as you can go into melee engagements knowing that you can press the advantage and control the fight. Compare this with fencing or balanced, in which you go into melee engagements knowing that you will have to fish for parries to stagger and deal gunstrike damage as your main source of pain. With block weapons, that stagger capability of parry is built into your melee attacks for 2.4 seconds, so your defense is enacted, channeled through your offensive actions. That light attack and the power whirl is also going to deal extreme poise damage, so any enemy that's attacking you while you are performing the attack will just get staggered and you will interrupt them. Envisage a swarm situation like this. You are surrounded by plenty of warriors and gaunts scuttling around you, wanting to snuff the light out of your eyes. Plenty of warriors means opportunities for them to attack out of sequence, and unfortunately you've positioned yourself quite badly and you're tucked into a corner, backed against a wall. With the block power sword, you time 2 perfect blocks. You light attack a warrior and enter power whirl to create breathing room with the 2 block stacks, creating stagger in a small radius, and the power whirl is decimating groups of warriors and gaunts with the 90% additional damage applied because of the adrenaline surge bonus. The power whirl attacks 4x multiplier on both parts of the animation will just slice through gaunts. They will not be a problem for you, and the damage bonus as well will take out warriors and put most of them into an iframe executable state opportunity, which you should then take to swivel the camera around and assess your situation before repeating the cycle over again. Always pressing the advantage, and with 2 perfect blocks you are just pressing the advantage tenfold. You mustn't also wait around just for the 2 perfect blocks, because you use this opportunity to press the advantage and continue dealing damage, and that is core to the block variant playstyle. You want to be aggressive, you want to keep swinging, you don't want to stand around and look for opportunities for blocking or parrying. You want to be mobile, always on the move, always doing something. The caveat here is that you can only press the advantage once you are confident with the very tight timings of perfect blocking and not having the ability to parry. If you're starting out and you're missing your perfect blocks due to knowing only the fencing parry windows, you are not going to have a good time, and this will likely create a negative perception for you and block weapons not being useful or are difficult to use or not having any utility at all, when with practice and with time the hurdle of perfect block timings and managing your armor economy without parries can be overcome, and you can enjoy the significant benefits that block weapons can bring. Though to help expedite that process a little bit for you, I will show on screen now a few examples of the perfect block timings against various Tyrannid enemies, so the Bone Swords, Whip Warriors, Lictors, Raveners, etc. Just so you can see the tight timings there are to pull off a perfect block, but then also how these attacks then stagger the enemies, and you could essentially ignore other incoming attacks from either the particular enemy, or if you are in a horde situation, from multiple enemies. I want to take the time now to clarify an important part of the block weapon variant which enables its high damage output. There's a widespread misconception that the block buffs alone are responsible for the weapon's high damage, and while having one or two block stacks does increase the damage you deal by about 90%, the real boost comes from the block debuff. This is a temporary damage taken debuff you apply to enemies after a perfect block and also a perfect parry, which results in a gun strike opportunity. This effect is visually indicated by a brief yellow highlight which lasts around 2.2 to 2.4 seconds. During this very short window, the afflicted enemy is believed to take approximately 50% more damage. What I come to understand as 1 point of your actual damage translating to the enemy losing 1.5 hit points value. To put it more simply, if you were to deal 100 points of raw damage, the enemy will effectively take 150 HP damage. Taking that 100 points of damage example even further, the 90% increase you have after 2 block stacks would output 190 points of raw damage, as 90% of 100 is 90 and you add the two together. However, with the debuff applied as well, every point of damage from that 190 equates to the enemy taking 1.5 HP damage value. So your 190 damage becomes an effective 285 HP worth of damage to the target afflicted with this glowing yellow debuff. Towards the start of this video, I was talking briefly about how the Thunder Hammer and the Power Fist charge attacks take some time to prepare, and this preparation time usually results in missing out on this debuff window. However, the raw power behind those charged attack multipliers does not necessarily need the debuff to be active. However, with the block power sword, the speed of the power whirl attack allows you to execute within the 2.2 to 2.4 second window of the debuff, and also the 2.4 seconds approximate time of the block buff itself. So the power sword allows you to take advantage of the time window of the block buff and the block debuff together, and this helps output extreme damage. In general combat, performing 2 perfect blocks and entering the power whirl stance, the light attack and the first half of the power whirl attack will benefit from the 2.4 seconds of the debuff and the buff. The best showcase of the block buff and debuff acting concurrently to great effect is the one-shot capabilities of the assault class, with ground pound attacks versus Extremis, and those very same attacks dealing a lot of damage to Terminus enemies as well. The ground pound attack for the longest time was only able to one-shot warriors with the block Thunder Hammer. However, a recent patch allows now balanced and block variants to deal the one-shot versus warriors and other Majoris enemies. However, the ability to one-shot Extremis and chunk Terminus hit points resides fully within the jurisdiction of block weapons, and it is with the block power sword where you deliver the most damage. The most important perks you will need to take class-wise is Precision Strike, Knowledge of the Enemy, and Strategic Strikes. As for the weapon perks, you want to take all the damage perks available that increase by 5, 10%, etc., and also the threat level specific ones excluding the Minoris one. The ground pound attack is achieved by performing perfect blocks against the Extremis in question and performing the ground pound attack within that 2.4 second window of the debuff being applied. Previous patches you would need 2 perfect blocks, so max block buff, to achieve a one-shot against Extremis all the way up to In the current patch, and just with 1 block stack, you can achieve the same result. In my recent operations with Assault and the Power Sword, I now only perform a ground pound attack with one block stack, and it's just quicker to pull out and I get rid of Extremis quite quickly. However, versus Terminus, you want to deal as much damage as possible, so getting 2 block stacks is what you want. The sheer damage that you deliver will take off a quarter of a Carnifex's hit point value, and also the Hive Tyrant as well. The positioning of the ground pound attack is also very important. In order to get the most damage and the most effect from this attack, you want to angle your ground pound so you hit the center of mass of the Carnifex or the Hive Tyrant rather than landing in front of it. So your attack will need to go through the Carnifex or the Hive Tyrant. I have played this build quite a lot, and throughout the many operations I have always tried to find out whether it's possible to exceed this damage output via a ground pound attack versus Terminus enemies. There are a couple of ways where you can eke out a little bit more damage on your ground pound attack. The first of which concerns a particular perk on the Power Sword which deals additional damage for X seconds after you change your stance. The second of which is the Aerial Grace class perk which you activate after a perfect dash, and it provides a 30% additional general damage boost which only really affects melee and ranged, not gun strikes. If you have the opportunity to string these two together, you can then amplify your ground pound damage even further, but doing so requires deliberate thinking to activate these buffs and then getting the block buffs and debuffs to all happen within the same window. Doing all of that, however, is quite difficult to execute and is not at all practical in your general melee scenarios. What is most achievable is changing your stance after a Carnifex swipe attack, or the Hive Tyrant's swipe attack, as they often come in 2 or 3. So with the Carnifex, for example, when it raises its talons to signal the slow attack, you can block one, change stance, block the second one, then attack, and that buff from your Power Sword stance change perk should eke out further damage. But the amount of on-the-spot preparation to dash and get the block buffs is quite difficult. One potential scenario to achieve this would be if you were to get a perfect dash from, say, a Majoris, then go to the Carnifex, who then attacks you twice, and provides you with the time to stance change. Only then would you be able to eke out some more damage. But as you can probably tell, this is going to be quite difficult and not so easy to do in practice. Despite this, there is an easier way to amplify your damage, and with Space Marine 2 being a team game, you probably already know what I'm about to say. If one of your squad mates is a tactical, then the Auspex scan will amplify your ground pound damage even further. If you want to know by how much your damage will increase, well, thankfully I managed to record one such gameplay where I have achieved an almost one-shot of the Hive Tyrant on absolute difficulty. Quite the bloody powerful damage dealt indeed, and it makes me wonder if it is possible to one-shot Terminus enemies on absolute difficulty, considering how close I was in achieving this. Perhaps a little more damage could be eked out as I was attempting a stance change. However, teammates in Space Marine 2 have an affinity for throwing grenades at your feet, which staggered me out of doing this. So if I were able to have stance changed in this situation, I don't actually think I would have made the one shot possible. Perhaps just a little bit more damage. However, maybe stacking the dash benefit from Aerial Grace on top of it could have got me closer. I also don't know if the Auspex from the tactical in question was the one which has the maximum damage taken effect applied to it. So there is still room for our experimentation to see if this is possible. I would like to think that it is, but requires very precise executions of skill, but if it happens and I'm able to do it, well, you guys will be the first to know. It looks like it could happen, but we shall see. You can also deal this amount of damage to an Auspex Carnifex, as I've done this a handful of times in various operations. However, I did not record any of this gameplay, so it'll be a case of trust me, bro. However, as you can see, I was able to do this versus the Hive Tyrant, who shares a similar HP value now on Absolute with the Carnifex. I'll skip ahead in the background footage of my absolute difficulty true solo run on Decap to better fit this next section about how to handle Minoris hordes and waves of gaunts and tyranids, as it's quite the apt moment to display the sheer strength and utility of the block power sword, even versus these little critters. As mentioned earlier, block weapons require you to play aggressively and always be doing something, always in motion, swinging, repositioning, pressuring the foe. That constant movement also perfectly aligns with the assault class's identity of evasion, mobility and offense. The Power Whirl attack, which is great against Majoris, is also quite phenomenal versus hordes of gaunts. The 4x multiplier for damage on the first and second half of the animation of Power Whirl just absolutely kills gaunts. In practice, the first part of the animation will kill any gaunts in your immediate space, while the second part, where you launch yourself up and slam the sword into the ground, catches any gaunts who are approaching. However, while the Thunder Hammer provides you hyper armor between the release and uppercut portion of the attack, the Power Sword in the Power Whirl attack stance does not provide any protection at all, which means you are always at risk of taking chip damage from Minoris while performing this attack. While many would just eat up this damage and resolve the issue later by finding a stim pack and injecting that, playing on higher difficulties with any class, and particularly more so with the assault class, requires you to think a lot more differently. To prevent damage from ever touching your health bar, you must remain acutely aware of your current armor level. High level play demands constant vigilance of the maintenance of your armor throughout combat. Why? Because prolonging the time it takes for enemy damage to affect your health is a crux for winning or losing the engagement. For the assault class, combat isn't just about dealing damage, it's also about maintaining your armor to prolong your melee engagements and continuing to output that high level of damage. The entire dialogue suggesting Assault struggles in close combat, despite it being his primary role, often stems from overlooking this core combat mechanic. You absolutely can mitigate and prevent the damage you take, but it requires on your feet thinking rather than a "I'll deal with it later" attitude with a stim. There are numerous ways to restore armor in Space Marine 2, the most obvious of which is through executions, which grant you one segment of armor and a moment to survey your surroundings and plan your next move. Lethal gun strikes, so those gun strikes which kill an enemy, will also restore an armor segment, and this is most commonly achieved after engaging a Minoris enemy with a sprinting light attack, as you will knock them back and receive a gun strike marker. Cast your mind back to the benefits of block weapons, and you should recall that attacking an enemy with max block buff, so 2 Adrenaline Surge stacks, provides numerous benefits, one of which being armor restoration, of which you will restore 1 armor segment after landing an attack with the block buff active. Furthering this, the sheer damage output of block weapons will push Majoris and Extremis threats into an executable state extremely quickly, meaning you can often recover 2 segments of armor from the initial explosion, signaling the block buff activating, plus killing the enemy itself and executing them will give you another one. During swarm fights, you should be constantly setting up opportunities to restore your armor while remaining on the offensive. So opportunities putting warriors into the execute state from attacks, using sprinting light attacks within fights on Minoris to proc lethal gun strikes, and also getting perfect blocks and using that to get armor back on demand. Another very consistent way to maintain armor for the assault class that I adopt quite extensively is with the class perk Armor Reinforcement, and this particular perk allows you to regain an armor segment from a non-lethal gun strike, or in other words, your gun strikes on an enemy that doesn't result in a kill. Gun strikes are typically associated with the parry mechanic, as fencing or balance will trigger a gun strike opportunity. However, to say that this is your only way to get gun strikes is incorrect. It is incorrect because there exists a largely underutilized combat mechanic called perfect dodging. Regular dodging outside of combat results in those dodge rolls or little leaps that your marine will perform. However, pressing that button within a precise time window within combat before an enemy hits you will activate what is called a perfect dodge. Time will slow down, you will negate the damage taken, and a gun strike marker will appear. This gun strike marker counts towards armor reinforcement, which you should take to restore armor. The Assault starting class perk makes this process significantly easier by extending the perfect dodge window by 50%. Despite this increased window, it's not an accessible combat action compared to fencing and parrying with fencing weapons. Fortunately, the extended window for Assault's perfect dodge is remarkably similar, if not the same, as the timing required for perfect blocking with blocked weapons. Therefore, if you master one, you've essentially figured out the other. It's simply a matter of building confidence and remembering to hit the dodge button instead. Perfect dodging can be performed against any and all melee attacks from Majoris threat level enemies and higher. As I mentioned in my previous guide with the Block Thunder Hammer, a prevalent misconception is that it can only be performed against attacks that have a red warning indicator, and unfortunately this misconception still persists to this day. Therefore, I once again find it prudent to reiterate that perfect dodging can be performed against any melee attack. Be it red, be it blue, or those without any warnings at all, you can perfect dodge any melee attack. This misconception I don't find to be the fault of players who sort of propagate this. Instead, the problem lies within the game's mechanics and what is quite commonly the lack of clarity and or information from the developers themselves about mechanics that they have in the game. Have a look at the block weapons, for example. Little information from themselves about this. Furthermore, parrying and blocking have immediate, tangible benefits, whereas perfect dodging only provides the gun strike. And yes, I know the argument behind perfect dodging negating damage, but so does perfect parrying and perfect blocking. They negate damage as well. And this line of argument perpetuates further the idea, the false idea, that perfect dodging is only for red warning attacks. Regardless, perfect dodging contributes to the mobility and evasive factors of the Assault class. Utilizing it extensively and not just against the obvious red warning attacks should help reinforce the feeling for you when playing Assault that it is truly agile. While I think there is certainly more to be done to make Assault more accessible and feel more mobile than evasive, as its offensive capabilities are already in quite a good place, practicing your perfect dodge timings is quite important to this playstyle as it complements block weapons The way in which it does is that if you pay attention to enemy attack patterns, they often have a 2 or 3 hit combination. You can usually string 2 blocks and a dodge throughout these attack patterns, such as blocking the first 2 attack and dodging the last, blocking the first, dodging the second, and blocking the last, or dodging first and blocking the last 2. The mechanical benefits from this as well open up certain combos that you can perform with the Assault class, with respect and regards for the previous information surrounding block buffs and debuffs. Let's say you're going against a whip warrior which has 4 attacks. Starts off with a first one, then 2 quick rapid ones in succession, followed by a last final whip. You could block all 4 to apply the block debuff and strike back with the block buff and remove the warrior. Or you could dodge the first and block the rapid succession of 2 attacks. And what this does is apply the debuff, grant you the block buff, but also a gunstrike marker, which you can take either immediately to benefit from the 50% damage taken debuff, or you can attack the enemy, and once you execute your power whirl attacks, the gunstrike marker will still be there, which you can use to finish off the enemy. Performing this attack combination also has the benefit of restoring armor twice, perhaps even thrice, as the 2 perfect blocks, and using that on your next attack that hits will grant you an armor back. The gun strike will receive benefit from armor reinforcement from the assault class perk to also give you an armor segment back. And lastly, the enemy, should they go into the executable state, will provide you with another segment of armor. Once you are comfortable with the base dodge timings, you can also then advance to the assault specific extension of perfect dodging, which is jetpack dashing. Instead of simply pressing the regular dodge button to execute a perfect dodge, you can instead tap the ability button to perform a jetpack dash. You can do this outside of combat to move a distance which a regular dodge cannot. If you time this button input of your dash at the same time as you would a regular dodge, you will execute a perfect dodge with a jetpack dash, which I will henceforth call a perfect dash just for simplicity. At its core, this is essentially a fancy perfect dodge. It does provide greater distance during the evasion, but provides the exact same, in quotation marks, benefits, end quote, of regular dodging. There's nothing else to it but the distance and the fancy animation. So yes, inherently the jetpack dash at its base level is just a fancy dodge. You can, however, improve this fancy dodge with additional effects from a few class perks. There are only 3 realistically worthwhile perks that improve the jetpack dash mechanic. First up is Wings of Flame, which provides trajectory damage during the dash portion of the animation. There's Aerial Grace, which provides a 30% damage bonus to melee and ranged attacks for 10 seconds after a successful perfect jetpack dash. And lastly, there is the mandatory Commitment perk, which fully restores a charge after executing a perfect dodge with the jetpack. Wings of Flame can be a useful perk for the so-called full dash build that players of Assaults are enjoying as of late. However, Wings of Flame is in the same column as Zealous Blow, which restores jetpack charges from ground pound kills. There's no right or wrong answer on which one you would like to take when playing the block dodge build. However, I will always promote Zealous Blow over Wings of Flame as having different ways to restore your jetpack from natural usage of ground pounds and through commitment, through dashing, is what I value much more than dealing trajectory damage, especially as you will already deal exceptional damage from ground pounds and general melee attacks. Aerial Grace is a worthwhile perk, and I enjoy using it on the block dodge playstyle, as the 30% damage bonus to melee and ranged attacks is very useful in a lot of ways. It is important to note that the ranged damage bonus does not include gunstrike damage. That is a completely different damage type altogether and are only affected by perks which explicitly mention gunstrike damage in the perk description. From memory, this is the Assault's Proven Efficiency perk and also the one on Tactical. While this 30% bonus to melee helps you cleave through mixed enemy groupings quite well, the damage profile of the block power sword, as I've shown in this video thus far, is already very strong. However, layering this buff on top dramatically improves your ability to force Majoris and higher enemies into the executable state with power whirls much faster than with just block stacks alone. There are also some meaty, exciting and fun to pull off combinations that you can achieve with this Aerial Grace class perk through blocking and dashing. But the combination consists of just blocking and dashing, but the timings of when you do them can change depending on what outcome you want. The typical one that I employ is blocking twice then dashing instead of blocking twice and dodging. This would allow you to get 2 Adrenaline Surge stacks, so the max block buff, and getting an additional 30% general damage on top of that. So that is an effective 120% melee damage with those 2 components in effect, plus whatever additional damage perks you have on Assault and your Power Sword. The min-max variants of these combinations, if you wish to employ them, though, please note that it can be considered quite sweaty to just do it in this particular way. If you block to get the first Adrenaline Surge stack, dash to get the 30% bonus to ranged and melee, then block once more, you will then have the 30% additional damage from the Aerial Grace class perk, the 90% bonus from the block buffs, and the 50% more damage taken debuff applied to the enemy, which is a lot of pain indeed. You of course then just wail into the enemy with these significant buffs, and most of the time these warriors will just die outright. Both combinations will also provide a gunstrike opportunity, which you can take at any point you would like. But the min-max route would be using that gunstrike at the very end of your attack sequence after the block buffs and debuffs are gone. My favourite application of Aerial Grace, and one that I consider to be the best purpose for it, is getting the 30% bonus to range damage after dashing through a Zoanthrope or Neurothrope beam. Speccing for headshots on your heavy bolt pistol, this 30% bonus will really help take those bloody brain bugs out from the sky, while looking cool doing so as well. However, I will go into a more detailed guide on how to dodge Zoanthrope and Neurothrope beams and dashing through them as well. I will go on to that shortly, but first it's a look at the final mandatory perk for Jetpack dashing, and that is Commitment. It is mandatory to take commitment when committing towards Jetpack dashing as part of your playstyle, because the effect of the perk is restoring a full charge after a successful perfect Jetpack dash. This is the perk that can effectively provide you with unlimited uptime in melee engagements so long as you perform the Jetpack dash within the perfect dodge windows. However, this perk is quite contentious. The perk placement itself is questionable. Assault has some baseline evasive mobility with standard perfect dodging, but this is the class with a jetpack, and naturally we want to use the jetpack as often as possible. Unfortunately, the way the developers have implemented the jetpack and how we use it constrains our ability to more or less have fun the way that we think we should be having with a class that has a jetpack. Dashes and ground pounds both cost one full charge, and running out of charges results in the assault class taking the stairs like his battle brothers. Therefore, under the current parameters of the assault toolkit, I continue to take both Zealous Blow and Commitment, as they are the only ways to restore the jetpack charges through using the ability, which currently makes Assault the only class with this ability recharge feedback loop. Classes like the Vanguard or the Sniper or the Bulwark can perform simple actions not tied to their ability to get their ability charges back. The Tactical can also restore its ability charge outside of ability use through its Prestige perk, which restores 25% or thereabouts of its Auspex scan by picking up an ammo box. As useless as that is, it is an option, whereas Assault can only restore charges through being proactive, which is a good principle in theory, but everything else, the mechanics behind it, the way the charges are consumed, does not help at all. With the developers' emphasis on perfect dashing and creating more utility with dashing with the upcoming improved dash attack animations and a reshuffle of a few perks to cater towards this move, having Commitment being the very last perk is quite counterintuitive to this initiative and playstyle that they are wanting players to adopt. However, this emphasis is also quite flawed because the natural progression for dashing would be learning your perfect dodge timings to then jetpack dash, but as explained, dodging is not necessarily seen as a combat action on par with parry or block, so fundamentally it has not got any ground. One way that the developers have tried to encourage dashing was through their update to the Wings of Flame effect. So prior to the Block Thunderhammer guide that I had released earlier this year, they changed the effect of Wings of Flame from just dealing damage on trajectory to also include a dash always counting as a perfect dodge, which it sort of does, but not in the way that you might think. For me and for many other devout Assault players, this was a move to promote dashing. However, while both actions continue to cost a charge, each a full charge, the opportunity cost remains, and thus dashing will remain as the lesser option of jetpack usage. Zoanthropes and Neurothropes are dastardly Tyranid brainbugs who are a sniper's dream but an absolute nightmare for the melee-focused Assault and Bulwark classes. What would take 2 or 3 shots from a last fusel will take triple or quadruple that with a heavy bolt pistol. And if you are running a plasma pistol, you can lose a third of your entire ammo just pumping charged shots into a zone, and you'd expend everything you've got if fighting a Neurothrope. They are notorious for what is perhaps the single most detested and abhorred attack in the entire game, and that is their beam attack. It has a wonky hitbox which does not fit what you see attacking you on screen. Strafing to the side will still result in a hit because the actual hitbox is larger than its visual. Fortunately, there is a counter, and that is perfect dodging into the beam, and a fun fact is that this is the only ranged Tyranid and possibly Chaos attack that can be perfectly dodged. Dodging into the attack, I hear you wonder, wouldn't that just put myself into harm's way? Why would I want to perform this? It's quite counterintuitive, I know, but perfect dodging, as you will recall, hopefully, provides iframes right at the start of the animation, which negates any incoming damage. Therefore, your best course of action against this attack is perfect dodging into it. You just need to time it properly. Luckily, you don't need to figure this out yourself, because I've played, tested, and refined my approach to dealing with these flying sacks of bullshit, so that I can share with you, my dear viewer, how to nail perfect dodges. If you've watched my Assault Block Thunderhammer guide, you'll recall the Carnifex section where I explained the 2-4 second rhythm to its swipe attacks. This 2-4 philosophy extends to Zoanthropes as well, but not with perfect blocking, but with dodging, and this also emphasizes how similar the blocking and dodging timings are. On screen now, I will play a few clips of me perfectly dodging Zoanthrope beams, and what I would like you to do while watching is count to 2 seconds, not from when you see the red warning indicator, but the exact moment you see the beam appear, form in the Zoanthrope's mouth. You should see that on the second I perform the perfect dodge and do not get hit. I'll loop these clips so you can see the 2 second part of the philosophy in action. Always dodging on that second once you see the beam come out of its mouth. Now, these brain bugs can also decide to beam you twice. There's no real indication for it. You just either get it or you don't. However, in this case, count to 4 seconds in the clips that I'm showing, and you'll see that on the 2nd and 4th second, I performed the perfect dodge, and I'm fine. If you are confident with your timing, you can actually sneak a gun strike in between the 2 beams. But if you struggle with Zoanthrope beam dodging, don't attempt it. I only do it because I've dodged countless beams, and the timings are essentially burned into my brain. There is also an audio cue that you can listen out for as well, so just pay attention to that. It's not particularly easy to describe, but there is a pinpoint moment across all of these attacks that you will see when I start thinking and considering to take the dodge and when I actually do it. Against Neurothropes, the 2-4 second philosophy is still in effect here. We only concern ourselves with the 4th second. And unlike the Zoanthropes, you will want to start the countdown when you see the red warning indicator. Once you understand the timings, you can run towards the beam and dodge through it. Visually, the cue is quite simple. You dodge when the beam is about to touch your feet, not any earlier or not any later, as doing either will just fuck you over. It does take practice, but eventually you will get the timing down, not just on Assault, but on the other classes as well, as I will show now.
stamina too. World battle awareness is in.
Once you are comfortable, you can also jetpack dash through the beam. I'm a big fan of doing this as you can proc aerial grace, which allows your heavy bolt pistol shots to be upped by 30% additional range damage, and this helps you delete these arseholes much faster. You just need to replace your regular dodge input with the jetpack dash. The timing is pretty much the same, though the dash does provide slightly longer iframes, at least it does feel that way to me. So there is a tiny bit more forgiveness, but it's not that much. Many new Assault players and also a couple of veterans are drilled to believe that jetpack charges should only be spent on ground pound attacks. And while it's true that the damage from ground pounds is quite mad, you do need to break the habit of thinking that jetpack charges are only spent for this purpose. Just because you are playing on absolute does not mean your thinking has to be absolute as well. Stop overvaluing opportunity costs of the ground pound attack charge to the point that you ignore all the other utility that the jetpack can provide. Your jetpack isn't just for damage, it's a mobility tool. You've already seen how it enables perfect dashing, but its value goes well beyond that. For example, if you see a red warning behind you to signal the approach of possible spore mines, it's better to spend a charge to get the hell out of dodge than it is to spam the dodge roll button. Find yourself stuck in those green pools that the Neurothrope spawns because you are quite close to a teammate and so there's 2 or 3 pools and you need to get out of dodge. Again, jetpack dash out of there. The ground pound attack can also be used to get out of tricky situations. You can use it to propel yourself forwards and launch yourself even further with the second part of the animation. It's a mobility trick just as much as it is a powerful attack. That first part of the ground pound attack where you ascend can also be used to achieve elevation. For example, on Decapitation, as you enter the cathedral portion at the very start, you can look up and see the platform above where you would normally take the stairs. You can actually press the ability button to launch yourself up there. Jetpack charges are not just for ground pound attacks, so please stop thinking in absolutes. Stop treating your charges as though they only exist for one optimal action. The jetpack is designed for movement, positioning, pressure, escaping, and also ground pounds. You have 2 charges, use them to do what you need, not what you feel forced into by rigid theory crafting and what others tout to you on Reddit and other social. On the other side of the coin, you shouldn't just expend all of your charges in one go. You shouldn't just use it just to dash forward when there is no reason to do so. I also advise against using both charges to spam ground pounds consecutively, because then you are quite likely going to find yourself in a position without having any charges at all. It's always good to have at least one in your back pocket in case you really need to get out or want to perform a perfect dash or another ground pound in another cluster of enemies where you could actually get some charges back. You need to build a healthier relationship with your charges, a blend of being conservative and liberal, free from absolute black and white thinking. See a cluster of tightly packed warriors, ground pound them, but then keep the other charge and press the advantage with the absurd offensive potential of the block power sword, block buffs, debuffs, perfect dodging, gun strikes, etc. Only if you are confident you can use that remaining charge for perfect dashing, with commitment cycling that charge over and over. Put simply, spend your charges intelligently while having fun, but don't hoard them all for a single purpose and don't waste them all with needless actions. I agree the charge system does need a rework. Assault as a whole could do with one, and I'll likely make a video on that in the future with my close to 2,000 hours with the game. However, develop this mindset now and you'll feel far more mobile and comfortable with the class, instead of chaining yourself to what others would say is the quote correct end quote use of the ability. You are, after all, playing the class who can perform multiple actions with one ability. We are now coming to the end of this quite long overdue block power sword, block dodge assault, tips, strategies and commentary video, and I hope that it's been useful for you and that the information contained here helps you on your journey towards becoming a mobile, evasive and aggressively effective melee combatant, even on absolute difficulty. Not long after I will upload this video, patch 11 for Space Marine 2 will arrive, bringing changes to Assault and the other classes. I wanted to release this before that, as I've been delaying it for a while due to personal circumstances and prioritising other bits of content. The astute amongst you may notice similarities between the tips and strategies here and those that I provided in the Block Thunderhammer guide earlier this year, and that's simply because the underlying core mechanics have stayed the same since then, and I suspect that they will remain that way for the foreseeable future. That said, I know the developers are planning to revisit the dash mechanic, improving the animation and adjusting a few class perks to encourage the use of what I call the dash attack. The issue is that nobody has ever really used this attack, because spending a charge to dash into an engagement will never outcompete, firstly, a ground pound to enter engagement, and secondly, a perfect dash. You can already convert a reactive perfect dash into a proactive dash attack by hitting the light button after executing a perfect dash, but the payoff is absolutely terrible, considering the amount of button inputs required, the amount of attention you need to be paying, not to mention the precise timing and aiming needed. What makes it doubly so worse is that the damage multiplier of a dash attack currently is the same as your sprinting attacks. So I'll just use the Thunderhammer as an example. If you sprint attack with Thunderhammer, it's called a pommel strike. It has a 0.5 times damage multiplier, effectively making it half the damage of a light swing. The dash attack, so launching yourself with a jetpack and hitting the attack button, will perform a sprinting attack that's boosted by the jetpack. Currently it looks a little bit stupid because it performs a dash, a little stop, and then you perform the sprinting attack, but with that aside, it still outputs the same damage as a regular sprinting attack, so there's really no reason to use it. throughout the life cycle of this game, they've tried to improve this attack by buffing the Winged Fury perk, I believe it's called, on Assault, and this has received a slew of updates. It's currently at a 100% damage increase, but this is a noob trap because all this does is turn that 0.5x multiplier into a 1x, so it's the same damage as a light swing. And personally, if you are using your jetpack to initiate an attack with a dash to do the same damage as an attack you can perform without spending a charge, then what's the point? So we'll see if there's anything tangible to come out of this update. I don't suspect that there will be, because the developers are quite hesitant with doing anything meaningful for Assault. Anyways, once the update goes live, I will experiment with the changes within the central block dodge playstyle to see if anything is worthwhile, though again I'm fairly confident that at least at launch it won't be. On a somewhat related note, as the core mechanics seem set to remain stable while weapons shift around them, we'll get new ones coming out with the Tech Marine, for example, which probably will go out on Assault as well. And with the new patch coming on Tuesday, the Power Axe, Power Stance will work with block weapons, and I'll certainly be giving that a go. I probably won't create another complete, fully rounded hour-long tips and tricks guide unless something drastic happens to the combat fundamentals. What I will do instead is produce shorter videos acting as perhaps amendments or extensions to this current guide that you're listening to, with focused entries that cover any new combat features added to Assault or any new strategies worth mentioning, much like this guide and the Block TH one, but packaged more tightly around those specific topics. So the short little bit I've just done with the Zoanthrope and Neuro beam dodges, I might package that up as its own independent isolated video with a little bit more explanation and context in case you wanted to watch that, but also perhaps a focused guide on how to melee the Khan effects and deal with Neurotropes in general. Hive Tyrant, Trigon, the new Tyrannid Prime Warriors, which are coming out in the new operations, which I'm quite excited for. I hope that it's going to be at least similar or inspired by the fight in Dark Souls with Ornstein and Smaug, where if you kill one, the other one gains whatever abilities of the one you've just slain. I think that would be quite a cool combat engagement, but we'll see what the developers have cooked up. I know for certain that I will be creating a video on the improvements I'd like to see for the Assault class after almost 2,000 hours with the game, the vast majority of it being with Assault. And also because I don't really play any other games, actually, just Space Marine 2, as I quite enjoy playing that with my mates, and I'm a Warhammer nerd, to say the least. I've already been drafting up the script for the past couple of months when time allows, so hopefully we might see that this side of the year, if not early next year. On that subject, there won't really be anything about increasing the damage of Assault, because I feel like Assault in terms of damage output is in a good place, so I don't think that needs addressing. But what does need refinement are the evasion and mobility aspects. Two pillars of the class identity trifecta for me, the other one of course being damage output. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And if you have any questions as well about this playstyle, feel free to leave a comment below. You can also reach out to me on Reddit. I'll include my profile in the description. However, this is now the end, so until the next time, and enjoy having fun slaughtering Tyranids on absolute difficulty with this newfound approach to Assault that you hopefully will adopt. But yeah, catch you later, Battle Brothers.